Ethan Brooks had spent the last 11 months pretending to be poor. Not because he enjoyed lying, not because it was some twisted game, but because the truth had become too expensive. Every woman he met seemed to fall in love with his bank account before they ever learned his last name. Tonight was blind date number 14. He adjusted the faded denim jacket he'd bought from a thrift store, glanced at the cracked leather boots beneath the table, and checked the time. 7:03 p.m., 3 minutes late, not unusual. The little neighborhood cafe buzzed with quiet conversations and the smell of fresh coffee. It was the only place Ethan ever chose for blind dates. Simple, honest. Far away from the luxury restaurants everyone expected a millionaire to visit. The front door opened. A beautiful brunette stepped inside wearing designer heels and carrying a Louis Vuitton handbag. Her eyes searched the room until they landed on Ethan. She smiled for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at his clothes. The smile disappeared. "Ethan," she asked, "that's me." She hesitated. I think there must have been some mistake." "No mistake. You said you were a photographer." "I am. Full-time. I love taking pictures." She forced an awkward laugh. "I guess we're just in different places in life." Before Ethan could answer, she turned around, walked out the door, and climbed into a brand new Mercedes waiting outside. Less than 30 seconds. That was a new record. Ethan leaned back in his chair and laughed quietly to himself, not because it was funny, because disappointment had become familiar. "You okay?" A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked up. The waitress stood beside his table with a fresh cup of coffee. She wore a dark pink blouse beneath a black apron, her name tag reading, Grace. "I'm fine," Ethan replied. She looked toward the window where his date had just driven away. "No." She smiled gently. "I don't think you are." Ethan couldn't help smiling back. "You saw that?" The whole cafe saw it. She poured his coffee, for what it's worth. "I think she missed out." Ethan chuckled. "You don't even know me." Grace tilted her head. "I know enough. You stayed polite after she embarrassed you. Most people would have gotten angry. You just wished her a good evening." She placed a slice of warm apple pie on the table. "I didn't order this." "I know. It's on me. I can't let you." "Yes, you can." She winked. "I hate seeing good pie go to waste." For the first time in months, someone made Ethan smile, without asking what he did for a living, without asking what kind of car he drove, without asking how much money he made. As Grace walked back toward the counter, Ethan watched her laughing with an elderly customer before kneeling to help a little boy pick up the crayons he'd dropped on the floor. She treated everyone exactly the same. The businessman in the suit, the construction worker covered in dust, the lonely old widow eating dinner by herself. There was no performance, no calculation, just kindness. And for reasons Ethan couldn't explain, he suddenly found himself hoping she'd come back to his table. Little did he know. The woman who had just served him free pie was about to change not only his life, but his daughter's future forever. The next morning, Ethan Brooks pulled into the parking lot of Maple Grove Elementary in an old silver pickup truck that rattled every time he hit the brakes. It wasn't really his. He'd bought it from one of his employees 3 months earlier for one reason. It looked ordinary, exactly the way he wanted. Dad. 9-year-old Ava jumped out of the passenger seat before he could even turn off the engine. She wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. "You promised you'd come to my art show after school." "I remembered. You never forget." "I never will." She smiled before running toward the school entrance. Halfway there, she suddenly stopped, turned around, and ran back. "Daddy." "Yeah." She lowered her voice. "Did your date make you happy this time?" The question hit harder than Ethan expected. He forced a smile. "Not this one." Ava looked down at her sneakers. "I'm sorry." He gently lifted her chin. "Hey, none of this is your job to worry about. I just want someone to make you smile again." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Ever since Ava's mother had passed away 4 years earlier, his little girl had been trying to heal wounds no child should ever have to carry. He kissed her forehead. "Go inside before you're late." "I love you. I love you more." She waved one last time before disappearing through the school doors. An hour later, the same man driving a rusty pickup stepped out of a black elevator on the 42nd floor of Brooks Global Technologies. Employees immediately stood. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." "Morning, sir." The atmosphere changed the second he walked in. Executives followed him into the boardroom carrying reports worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A massive acquisition, 3 international contracts, a new AI project. Everyone waited for his decision. Ethan listened quietly, signed the paperwork, answered every question, and ended the meeting in less than 25 minutes. As people filed out, his longtime assistant, Daniel, stayed behind. "You canceled another charity gala. I know. You've turned down every social event this year." "I'm busy." Daniel smiled. "No, you're hiding." Ethan looked out across Manhattan. "I'm protecting my daughter." Daniel sighed. "You can't spend the rest of your life pretending to be someone else." "I'm not pretending. I really do like simple coffee shops." "That's not what I meant." Silence filled the office. Finally, Daniel placed another folder on Ethan's desk. "Your matchmaking service sent 3 new blind date requests." Ethan didn't even open it. "Set one for Friday." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "After 14 failures." "One day," Ethan said quietly, "I'm going to meet someone who notices how I treat people, before she notices what's in my bank account." That evening, instead of going home, Ethan found himself parking outside the same little cafe. He wasn't there for another date. He wasn't even hungry. He simply walked inside, sat in the same corner booth, and smiled when Grace looked up from the counter. "Back already?" She laughed. "I was starting to think you only came here to collect free pie." Ethan smiled. "Maybe I did." Grace picked up a coffee pot. "Good. Because today's pie is even better." And somehow, for the first time in years, walking into that little cafe felt more like coming home than returning to his $1 million penthouse. For the next 3 weeks, Friday nights quietly turned into Tuesday afternoons. Tuesday afternoons somehow became Sunday mornings. Without ever planning it, Ethan kept finding reasons to stop by Grace's cafe. Sometimes he brought his laptop, sometimes a camera, sometimes he came with no excuse at all. "You know," Grace said one afternoon as she refilled his coffee, "you're probably my easiest customer." Ethan looked up. "How's that?" "You never complain. You never send food back. And you always thank me." "I thought that was normal." Grace smiled. "You'd be surprised." She nodded toward a man across the room, yelling because his sandwich had too much mustard. "People show who they are when they think someone is serving them." Ethan glanced across the cafe. "I guess you're right." "No," Grace said softly. "I know I'm right." Their conversations became longer, more personal. He learned that Grace was 29. She worked double shifts 6 days a week, not because she loved waitressing, but because every extra dollar helped pay for her mother's medical treatments. Cancer, stage 3, insurance covered most of it, not all of it. "My mom keeps apologizing," Grace said quietly one evening. "She thinks she's ruining my life." "What do you tell her?" "The truth, which is that she's my mom. She spent 29 years taking care of me. It's my turn now." Ethan didn't say anything. He simply admired the calm strength in her voice. There was no bitterness, no self-pity, just love. "So," Grace asked with a teasing smile, "how's the photography business?" Ethan nearly laughed. "It's slow." "You've sold anything lately?" "A few pictures." She folded her arms. "Liar." Ethan blinked. "What?" "No photographer keeps their hands that clean." He looked down instinctively. She laughed. "I'm kidding." "You should have seen your face." For the first time in months, Ethan laughed without forcing it, a real laugh, the kind he hadn't heard from himself since Claire died. Grace smiled. "There it is." "What?" "The real smile. It looks better than the fake one." That night after the cafe closed, Grace found Ethan standing outside looking up at the stars. "You waiting for someone?" She asked. "Not anymore." She joined him on the sidewalk. The city lights reflected across the wet pavement after a light rain. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan nodded. "Why do I get the feeling you're hiding from your own life?" The question caught him completely off guard. "What makes you think that?" Grace shrugged. "You never answer questions about your family. You change the subject whenever someone mentions success. And every time your phone rings, you look at the screen before deciding whether to become someone else." Ethan stared at her. No one had ever noticed those things. Not even his closest friends. Grace smiled gently. "I wasn't trying to make you uncomfortable. I'm an artist. I notice details." Ethan looked away toward the street. You ever feel like that people only love the version of you they can use? Grace didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked him straight in the eyes. I think the right person falls in love with the parts of you that nobody else notices. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Cars passed. Rainwater trickled into the storm. 3 days later, Ethan was halfway through editing a family portrait on his laptop when Grace quietly placed a grilled cheese sandwich in front of him. I didn't order this. I know. You've been staring at that screen for 2 hours. You forgot to eat. Ethan smiled. You always notice everything. Grace shrugged. It's part of the job. No, Ethan laughed. I think it's just part of who you are. She smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she sat across from him for the first time. The cafe was nearly empty. Only an elderly couple shared coffee near the window. So, Grace asked, tell me something real. I've told you lots of real things. No, you've told me safe things. There's a difference. Ethan leaned back. What do you want to know? What scares you? The question landed like a stone. He stared into his coffee. Finally, he whispered, losing the only person I have left. Grace frowned. You have someone. My daughter. You have a daughter. Ethan smiled. Her name's Ava. She's 9. She thinks I make the world's worst pancakes. Grace laughed. That's adorable. Where is her mom? The laughter disappeared. Ethan looked toward the rain outside. She passed away 4 years ago. Grace's smile faded instantly. I'm so sorry. So am I. For a long time, I convinced myself I'd never date again. But Ava deserves more than a father who's always working. She deserves a home that feels whole. Grace nodded slowly. I understand that. My mom always says, loneliness is the one thing money can't buy away. Ethan looked at her. If only she knew how true those words really were, just then. Grace's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. Her face changed. She stepped away and answered quietly. Hi, Mom. No, don't worry. I'll figure something out. Please don't cry. I'm coming after my shift. She ended the call, forcing a smile before returning. Everything okay? Grace hesitated, then shook her head. Not really. My mom's treatment was delayed again. The insurance company denied another medication. They said it's not medically necessary. Ethan felt his chest tighten. How much? Grace immediately shook her head. No. I'm not telling you. Why not? Because I don't want pity. I've worked too hard to earn everything on my own. I'm not asking anyone to rescue me. Ethan admired her even more. Most people would have begged. Grace protected her dignity, even when life wasn't protecting her. That night, after leaving the cafe, Ethan didn't drive home. Instead, his truck disappeared into an underground parking garage downtown. 5 minutes later, he stepped into a private elevator. The doors opened directly into the executive floor of Brooks Global Technologies. His assistant looked surprised. Sir, I need a favor. Anything. I want you to find the best cancer specialist in New York. Daniel nodded. For you. No, for someone who can never know it came from me. Daniel didn't ask questions. He never did. And Daniel, if anyone finds out I was involved, cancel everything. No donations. No publicity. No recognition. I just want her mother to get the treatment she deserves. Daniel smiled quietly. That's why people stay loyal to you, Ethan. Ethan looked out across the Manhattan skyline. No, he said softly, they stay loyal because they know. Kindness doesn't need an audience. Little did Ethan know. Someone else had already started noticing the pieces of his secret. And before the week was over, Grace would discover something that would change everything between them. The following Friday, Ethan walked into the cafe carrying his old camera bag over one shoulder. Grace looked up from the register. You disappeared. He smiled. I missed 1 day. You missed 3. You counted. Grace tried not to smile. Maybe. She handed him his usual coffee before he even ordered it. You're becoming predictable. I'll try harder. I hope you don't. For a second, they simply looked at each other. Neither of them realized how comfortable silence had become. Business was slow that afternoon. Only a few customers occupied the cafe. Grace finally sat across from Ethan with her own cup of coffee. So, she smiled. I've got another question. Ethan laughed. Should I be worried? Probably. She leaned forward. What's the biggest lie you've ever told? Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. His heart skipped a beat. Of all the questions, why this one? He looked away. I don't know. Grace studied his face. I think you do. Before he could answer, an elderly man slowly walked into the cafe using a cane. Every employee was busy, without hesitation. Grace stood up. She helped him to a booth, took off his heavy coat, adjusted the chair so he could sit comfortably, and quietly asked, "The usual chicken soup, Mr. Harris." The old man smiled. "You always remember. You remember everyone." Grace winked. "That's my secret." Ethan watched the entire moment without saying a word. There was no audience. No camera, no reason to be kind, except that kindness was simply who she was, and somehow, that meant more to him than every glamorous woman he'd met in the last 5 years. That evening, Ethan was getting ready to leave when he noticed Grace sitting alone in the storage hallway behind the kitchen. Her eyes were red. She quickly wiped away a tear. "You okay?" She forced a smile. "I'm fine." "No," he said gently, "you're not." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she finally whispered, "My mom's doctor called." Ethan sat beside her. The treatment worked. But now they found something else. They want another surgery. Insurance still won't cover all of it. She laughed bitterly. "I keep telling everyone I'm strong. But honestly, I'm exhausted." Without thinking, Ethan reached over and held her hand. "You don't have to carry everything alone." Grace looked into his eyes. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I've known people with a lot more money than you. And somehow, you've always made me feel richer." Ethan swallowed hard. If only she knew. That night, after Grace went home, Ethan stood inside his penthouse looking at the Manhattan skyline. His phone rang. It was Daniel. "I found the surgeon. The best in the state. He agreed to take Grace's mother's case." Ethan closed his eyes. "What about the hospital bill?" "It's taken care of." "And your name?" Grace didn't say a word. She simply stared at the black SUV, then back at Ethan. "You." Her voice barely came out. "You really are him." Ethan nodded. "I wanted to tell you. I was terrified." Grace looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "This isn't the time. My mom needs me." Ethan opened the passenger door. "Then let's go." 20 minutes later, they rushed into St. Vincent Medical Center. Grace ran straight to the emergency desk. "My mother, Maria Rodriguez." The nurse looked at her computer. "They're preparing her for surgery." Grace's face turned pale. "Surgery." The internal bleeding got worse. "But we haven't approved the financial forms yet." The nurse smiled gently. "You don't have to worry about that anymore." Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" "The balance has already been cleared." She blinked. "There must be a mistake." "There isn't. Everything has been approved." Grace slowly turned toward Ethan. "You." He immediately shook his head. "It wasn't me." And for once, that wasn't a lie because technically it hadn't been. The payment had come through the Brooks Family Foundation. His name appeared nowhere. Grace knew exactly what he'd done anyway. Hours passed. Neither of them left the waiting room. The coffee grew cold. The vending machine hummed quietly. At nearly 2 in the morning, the surgeon finally walked out. "Miss Rodriguez." Grace jumped to her feet. "Your mother's surgery was successful." Relief hit her so hard, she nearly collapsed. Tears streamed down her face. Ethan caught her before she fell, without thinking. She wrapped her arms around him and cried against his shoulder for several minutes. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence carried more love than words ever could. Later, they sat together outside the hospital. The city was almost asleep. Grace finally broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you keep pretending to be broke?" Ethan stared across the empty street. "My wife died 4 years ago." Grace reached for his hand. "I know. After that, I didn't know who wanted me and who wanted my life. So I created a version of myself. But that had nothing. If someone stayed, I knew they were staying for me." He looked down. "Most people didn't." Grace smiled sadly. "They walked away before they ever met the real Ethan." He nodded. "Until you." She squeezed his hand. "I never fell for your old truck. I never fell for your money either. I fell for the father who carried extra crayons in his pocket because his daughter always forgot hers." Ethan looked at her in surprise. "You noticed that?" Grace laughed softly. "I told you. I notice everything." For the first time since losing his wife, Ethan felt something he thought was gone forever. Not hope, not relief, home, but neither of them realized. Someone had been watching from across the parking lot. A man quietly lowered his phone after taking several photos of Ethan and Grace together. By morning, those pictures would be everywhere, and the secret Ethan had spent nearly a year protecting would become the biggest headline in America. The next morning, Ethan's phone wouldn't stop ringing, missed calls, text messages, emails by 8 o'clock. Every major news outlet had published the same photographs. Billionaire CEO Ethan Brooks secretly dating a cafe waitress. Another headline read, America's most private millionaire finally finds love. Daniel rushed into Ethan's office carrying his tablet. You need to see this. Ethan barely glanced at the screen. I've already seen it. The board wants a statement. The investors are asking questions. The press is outside. Ethan calmly closed his laptop. They're not asking about my company. They're asking about my personal life. So they don't get a statement. Across town, Grace walked into the cafe, only to find 3 television crews standing outside. Camera flashes exploded the moment she opened the door. Grace, how long have you known Ethan Brooks? Did you know he was a millionaire? Are you engaged? Is this relationship real? She froze. The cafe owner quickly stepped outside. Leave her alone. She's here to work. The reporters ignored him. Grace lowered her head and pushed through the crowd, for the first time in years. She dreaded coming to work that afternoon. Ethan walked into the cafe anyway. Every customer recognized him. The room fell completely silent. Grace looked up from behind the counter. What are you doing here? I came for coffee. You know that's not why everyone's staring. I know. She walked over. They're saying I planned this. They think I chased your money. They're calling me a gold digger. Her voice cracked. I've worked too hard for people to think that's who I am. Ethan looked into her eyes. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have protected you. Grace shook her head. No. You spent months protecting yourself. Now let me protect us. Before Ethan could respond, Grace did something no one expected. She reached for his hand, right there, in front of every customer. In front of every camera pointed through the cafe windows. She smiled. Not for the reporters, not for social media, for him. I'm not ashamed of loving you. The entire cafe fell silent. Even the reporters outside stopped shouting. Grace continued. I met a man who treated every waiter with respect. A father who never stopped talking about his daughter. A stranger who quietly helped my mother without asking for recognition. I fell in love with that man before I ever knew he was a millionaire. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. For years, he had searched for someone who would choose him over his fortune. Standing in that little cafe, holding Grace's hand, he realized his search was finally over. But just when everything seemed perfect, Ethan's phone vibrated. It was Ava's school. His smile disappeared. He answered immediately. Hello. A terrified voice came through the phone. Mr. Brooks. It's Ava. There's been an accident. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. What happened to Ava? He asked, already running toward the door. The school principal spoke calmly. Mr. Brooks, she's conscious. But she collapsed during recess. The paramedics are taking her to Children's Memorial Hospital. We think it may have been a severe panic attack. I'll be there in 5 minutes. He hung up without another word. Grace was already grabbing her purse. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I know. She took his hand. But you're not doing this alone. 20 minutes later, they rushed into the emergency room. Ethan spotted Ava sitting on a hospital bed, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. The moment she saw him, she burst into tears. Daddy. Ethan wrapped his arms around her. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. The doctor stepped into the room. Physically. She's going to be fine. It wasn't her heart. It was stress. Ethan frowned. Stress. The doctor nodded. Children hear more than adults realize. She told us she's afraid someone is going to take her daddy away. Ethan looked at Ava. What do you mean, sweetheart? She wiped her tears. The kids at school said. That famous people never stay with their families. They said your new girlfriend will only want your money. And then she'll leave us. Silence filled the room. Grace slowly walked over and knelt beside the little girl. Can I tell you a secret? Ava nodded. Grace smiled gently. The first thing I ever liked about your dad. It wasn't his money. I didn't even know he had any. It was the way he smiled when he talked about you. You were his favorite conversation. Every single day. Ava looked up. Really? Grace laughed softly. He showed me your drawings. He told me about your soccer games. He even complained about your pancakes. Ava giggled. They're terrible. I know. We're going to teach him together. For the first time that day, Ava smiled. Then she did something that completely caught Ethan off guard. She reached for Grace's hand. Will you come to my school art show next month? Grace looked at Ethan, then back at Ava. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Later that evening, as Ava slept peacefully, Ethan and Grace stood outside the hospital watching the city lights. I almost lost everything today, Ethan whispered. Grace shook her head. No. You almost remembered what matters most. He looked at her. My company, my money, my reputation. None of it mattered when I thought something happened to my daughter. Grace slipped her hand into his. That's why you're different. You've always known what your real fortune is. Ethan smiled through tears. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel lonely anymore, but he also knew something else. There was one question left to ask, and it would change all three of their lives forever. 3 weeks later, Maple Grove Elementary buzzed with laughter as families filled the school gym for the annual art showcase. Children proudly stood beside their paintings. Parents snapped photos. Teachers smiled from across the room. Ethan walked in holding Ava's hand, for the first time in years. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just the same denim jacket he'd worn on his very first date at the little cafe. Ava looked up and grinned. You wore it. I promised. It's lucky. Ethan laughed. I think you're right. Just then, Grace walked into the gym carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. She wasn't wearing her cafe apron anymore. Instead, she wore a simple dark pink dress that instantly brought a smile to Ava's face. You came. Ava ran straight into her arms. I told you I wouldn't miss it. A few minutes later, the principal stepped onto the stage. We'd like to recognize one parent who has quietly helped dozens of families this year. Ethan frowned. He hadn't sponsored anything publicly. The principal smiled. Several students received anonymous scholarships. Our cafeteria debt was paid off, and 3 families were able to stay in their homes after someone covered their rent. The donor never asked for recognition. But today, I think he deserves it. The audience began looking around. Ethan slowly shook his head. No. He whispered. Grace smiled knowingly. It wasn't me. The principal continued. Mr. Ethan Brooks. The entire gym erupted into applause. Ethan stood frozen. He never wanted anyone to know. He slowly walked to the stage. I honestly don't know what to say. An elderly teacher in the front row smiled. Then tell us why. Ethan looked across the room. His eyes found Grace, holding Ava's hand. For a moment, nothing else existed. Finally, he spoke. When my wife passed away, I thought success could protect the people I loved. I was wrong. Money can buy comfort. It can buy buildings, cars, vacations, but it can't buy kindness. It can't buy loyalty. And it definitely can't buy love. He looked at Grace. The greatest thing that's ever happened to me. Walked into a little cafe wearing a black apron, and handed me a free slice of apple pie. Laughter filled the room. Grace wiped away a tear. That evening, after the event ended, the 3 of them stopped outside the same neighborhood cafe where everything had begun. The owner smiled as he opened the door. I saved your booth. Ethan laughed. I was hoping you would. They sat together exactly where his first blind date had walked away. A fresh slice of apple pie appeared on the table. Grace smiled. Still on the house. The owner winked. For you too. Always. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. Grace looked at him. Ethan. He gently took her hand. No speeches. No reporters. No headlines. Just one question. He opened a small velvet box. Inside, a simple diamond ring caught the warm cafe lights. Grace. You saw me. Before you saw my money. You loved my daughter. Before you loved my last name. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Home. His voice trembled. Will you marry me? Grace never looked at the ring. She looked only at him, the same man who had walked into the cafe pretending to be broke, the same father who carried crayons for his daughter, the same man who believed kindness mattered even when nobody was watching. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She laughed softly, then nodded. Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes. The entire cafe burst into applause. Even the cooks came out of the kitchen. Ava jumped into both of their arms. So, she grinned through happy tears. Does this mean I finally get a mom? Grace knelt beside her. Only if it's okay with you. Ava hugged her tightly. I've been waiting for you. Ethan closed his eyes for just a moment, trying to memorize the feeling. For months, he had hidden his fortune, believing money was the reason people always left. But in the end, it wasn't his fortune that changed his life. It was one waitress who looked past every disguise and saw the lonely heart behind it. And that was worth more than every dollar he would ever earn. Every dollar he would ever earn would change all three of their lives forever. 3 weeks later, Maple Grove Elementary buzzed with laughter as families filled the school gym for the annual art showcase. Children proudly stood beside their paintings. Parents snapped photos. Teachers smiled from across the room. Ethan walked in holding Ava's hand for the first time in years. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just the same denim jacket he'd worn on his very first date at the little cafe. Ava looked up and grinned. You wore it. I promised. It's lucky. Ethan laughed. I think you're right. Just then, Grace walked into the gym carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. She wasn't wearing her cafe apron anymore. Instead, she wore a simple dark pink dress that instantly brought a smile to Ava's face. You came. Ava ran straight into her arms. I told you I wouldn't miss it. A few minutes later, the principal stepped onto the stage. We'd like to recognize one parent who has quietly helped dozens of families this year. Ethan frowned. He hadn't sponsored anything publicly. The principal smiled. Several students received anonymous scholarships. Our cafeteria debt was paid off, and 3 families were able to stay in their homes after someone covered their rent. The donor never asked for recognition. But today, I think he deserves it. The audience began looking around. Ethan slowly shook his head. No. He whispered. Grace smiled knowingly. It wasn't me. The principal continued. Mr. Ethan Brooks. The entire gym erupted into applause. Ethan stood frozen. He never wanted anyone to know. He slowly walked to the stage. I honestly don't know what to say. An elderly teacher in the front row smiled. Then tell us why. Ethan looked across the room. His eyes found Grace, holding Ava's hand. For a moment, nothing else existed. Finally, he spoke. When my wife passed away, I thought success could protect the people I loved. I was wrong. Money can buy comfort. It can buy buildings, cars, vacations, but it can't buy kindness. It can't buy loyalty. And it definitely can't buy love. He looked at Grace. The greatest thing that's ever happened to me. Walked into a little cafe wearing a black apron, and handed me a free slice of apple pie. Laughter filled the room. Grace wiped away a tear. That evening, after the event ended, the 3 of them stopped outside the same neighborhood cafe where everything had begun. The owner smiled as he opened the door. I saved your booth. Ethan laughed. I was hoping you would. They sat together exactly where his first blind date had walked away. A fresh slice of apple pie appeared on the table. Grace smiled. Still on the house. The owner winked. For you too. Always. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. Grace looked at him. Ethan. He gently took her hand. No speeches. No reporters. No headlines. Just one question. He opened a small velvet box. Inside, a simple diamond ring caught the warm cafe lights. Grace. You saw me. Before you saw my money. You loved my daughter. Before you loved my last name. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Home. His voice trembled. Will you marry me? Grace never looked at the ring. She looked only at him, the same man who had walked into the cafe pretending to be broke, the same father who carried crayons for his daughter, the same man who believed kindness mattered even when nobody was watching. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She laughed softly, then nodded. Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes. The entire cafe burst into applause. Even the cooks came out of the kitchen. Ava jumped into both of their arms. So. She grinned through happy tears. Does this mean I finally get a mom? Grace knelt beside her. Only if it's okay with you. Ava hugged her tightly. I've been waiting for you. Ethan closed his eyes for just a moment, trying to memorize the feeling. For months, he had hidden his fortune, believing money was the reason people always left. But in the end, It wasn't his fortune that changed his life. It was one waitress who looked past every disguise and saw the lonely heart behind it. And that was worth more than every dollar he would ever earn.